Hey there Wargamers, this is Justin from Amp Services with part 2 of this week's X-Wing Wednesday video. In part 1, we discussed a long-range Alpha Strike option for Z95 headhunters, specifically for the Rebels. In this video, we're going to be discussing a medium to short-range Alpha Strike option for the Z95 headhunters, also for the Rebels. So, in the first video, we discussed Lieutenant Blount and the XX-23 thread tracers. That's a really good long-range option in conjunction with the concussion missiles. This particular build switches things up and it can deal considerably more damage, albeit at a lower range. So you're at a higher risk of taking damage coming in to get into range 1 to 2 to get off this combo. But if it does work, it's incredibly brutal. So let's jump right in and do a quick overview of what I use for my medium to short range Z95 Alpha Strike. So first of all, we're looking at, just like the previous video, 2 Bandit Squadron pilots or 2 Tallow Squadron pilots. For the same exact reasons, if you're trying to shave points, you could go with the 12-point Bandit Squadron, but in the current meta, the Tallow Squadron at 13 points for pilot skill 4 is a little bit more effective if you can get the points in to do it. Because he's going to fire before contracted scouts and at the same time as crack swarm ties and things like that, it makes these a lot more effective. If you're running a Bandit Squadron pilot and you go up against contracted scouts, they get to shoot before you do, and they could take out one of your ships before it gets to fire, at which point your missiles are not effective anymore because they're not on the table. Those 2 ships, however, hinge on Airen Cracken. Just like Lieutenant Blount, Airen Cracken is the crux of this list. If things don't work properly with him, the Alpha Strike is likely to fail. So let's discuss Cracken first, and then we'll move on to the rest. So Cracken comes in at 19 points, which is 2 points more than Blount does, but he has an 8 pilot skill, which is 2 over Blount. Again, the standard Z95 loadout for stats. It's got an elite pilot talent, munitions, and this awesome pilot ability. This pilot ability reads, after you perform an attack, you may choose another friendly ship at range 1. That ship may perform 1 free action. Now, Airen Cracken's different from Blount because Blount is always considered as having hit his target, even if he deals no damage. Once his missiles are gone, that ability almost goes out the window. Once Airen Cracken's initial Alpha Strike's over, this ability still kicks in and is still useful to some degree. Now, where we really drive home this really good ability is with his munitions upgrade. And let's discuss that next. So with Cracken, we're looking at using cluster missiles. They come in at 4 points, they have 3 attacks, they're at range 1 to 2, and they read, spend your target lock and discard this card to perform this attack twice. This is huge because for Airen Cracken, if he fires cluster missiles, he gets to perform his pilot ability once per attack. So if you're flying him in formation with your other Z95s, on the first shot from the cluster missiles, he can pick one of the Z95s to take a free action, and on the second shot, he can pick the other Z95 to take an action. This is really good because early on, your pilots are going to have generally a lower pilot skill than, say, an ace, and they may not be in range for a target lock. But later in the turn, that ace may move into target lock range after it's too late. So being able to get these cluster missiles off with Cracken, he could then allow those 2 ships to take free actions, which could be target lock, to then target lock the ship that wasn't in range earlier in the turn. This is huge. While at the same time, he can still deal damage, and he's getting 2-3 attacks on the target. And if it's at range 2, that's even more optimal because a Z95 only has 2 attacks base. So he's firing more attack dice with each attack than he would be on any single one. Now at range 1, Z95 would be firing 3 attacks, but with cluster missiles, it's still 3 attacks twice, so this is still good odds. Now if we couple the cluster missiles with guidance chips, which read, once per round, when attacking with a torpedo or munitions secondary weapon, you may change 1 die result to a hit result or a critical result if your primary weapon value is 3 or higher. Now, as I said in the previous video, Z95s are never going to get the critical bonus. Their attack value is too low, but they will get to change one of their one of their blank results or focus results to a hit. That's huge. So you've got 3 attack dice twice, and on at least one of those volleys, you get to change one of your hits, or one of your misses or focuses to a hit. That's pretty huge. It gives you a good chance of hitting, and it's a 0-point upgrade. Now, to finish Blount off here, there are a couple options you have for the elite pilot talent. Let's discuss the ones that I think are least effective. So let's start with Veteran Instincts. Now for 1 point, you could put Veteran Instincts on Cracken and increases a pilot skill value by 2, which puts him at a 10, and that's respectable. The problem is this may or may not help him get off his cluster missiles. So I think this one's not quite as effective. Your mileage may vary. And for the second pilot ability, or elite pilot skill that you could take, or talent you could take, could be adaptability. Now this one I think is a little bit more forgiving because it's free, so it's not going to hurt you points wise, and it could increase his pilot skill by 1, putting him at a 9. So if you put him at a 10, he would, I guess, get to shoot before some of the aces. He's still not shooting before Vader. If you put him at a 9, he still gets to shoot at the same time as Sunterfell, or things like that. So if he gets to shoot return fire, let's say Sunterfell gets to shoot first and kills Cracken, because of the return fire rule, Cracken would still have the opportunity to return fire before he's gone. So this still sets you up to be able to get off your Alpha Strike combo before he dies, unless he goes down to something like a Poe Dameron or Vader or Wedge. And even if he was going up against at least Wedge or Vader or the new Poe when it comes out, the Veteran Instincts isn't going to help him anyway, because he'd be a pilot skill 10 versus likely pilot skill 11. So if you're choosing between Veteran Instincts and adaptability, I think adaptability edges Veteran Instincts out just by a little smidge because it's free. And I think pilot skill 9 versus pilot skill 10 is not as big of a deal. I think pilot skill 11 at that high of a range is where you want to be if you can get there, and if you can't, pilot skill 9 is probably okay. Of the 3 suggestions though, I think Deadeye is probably the best option for Cracken. It also comes in at 1 point, so if you were considering Veteran Instincts, Deadeye is going to give you the same point spread. And it reads, you may treat the attack target lock header as attack focus. When attack instructs you to spend a target lock, you may spend a focus token instead. This is really good for Cracken because it allows him to bank a focus if he moves early on in the game and the ace he's trying to go after happens to not be in range for target lock. So you have something you can do. If they're not in range for target lock, you take your focus, and then if they happen to move into range, you can still get off your clusters. And if not, then you've got a token that's good for defense. So this is very well rounded, and it really helps him get off his combo when otherwise he may have been kind of ousted because he didn't get that target lock off. So now, how does he benefit them? So his attack range, his threat range, is range 1 to 2. Both of these are as well. So you'd run these guys in a really tight formation, and they're all hopefully going to bring their guns to bear on the same target. Where this differs from the Blount build, however, is that when Cracken fires his clusters, he gives each one of your Z95s a free action, and they could then take that action to acquire a target lock. That target lock does not necessarily have to be on the target that Cracken shot at. So let's say Cracken fires his cluster missiles, gets a whole bunch of hits, maybe the ship's going to go down. You could then use your free action to target lock someone else that's a more advantageous target. With Blount, if he target or uses his thread tracers and all 3 Z95s target the same ship, if Z95, the first concussion one for Blount finishes him off, then the second one's got a target lock it didn't actually get to use, which would have been more advantageous had he been able to then fire his missiles at someone else. So that's a trade-off. And then, if Cracken's, after he makes his second shot with his clusters, then if the ship's unlikely to go down, then you have some options for what you want to do with that second free action. It also couples really well with these guys because they can move forward, and just for the same reason that we would run Deadeye on Cracken, these two ships can move forward in formation with Cracken, and they can sit on a focus. They're ideally going to, or most likely going to be moving before Cracken unless something happens to him, so the aces are going to come in and move after them, so the aces may not have been in range for target lock at the onset. So you bank your focus on them, you then later in the turn move forward with Cracken. Cracken then uses a focus, and when it's his turn to fire, if he's in range for clusters, you use your Deadeye to activate clusters. Then with each shot of the clusters, you pick, first shot, you take your first Z95, he acquires a target lock if it's in range. Second Z95 takes the second free action, he acquires a target lock if he's in range. If they're in range to get off their clusters, which they should if they're in formation with Cracken at that point, they then spin their target lock to activate the clusters, and they're both still sitting on a focus that they can use on one of those cluster missile shots. So they've also got guidance chips, and they can use that on one of the 2 shots they make with clusters to get an extra hit. and then based on how the dice rolls are going, you've still got that focus token you can spend, either on the first attack or the second. So you've got pretty decent odds of trying to get damage through on the clusters. Now, looking at just volume of dice, if all 3 of these get to fire at the same target, you're looking at 2 cluster missile shots from Cracken. That's 6 dice on 1 target. Then you're looking at 6 more from the first of the lighter Z95s, and 6 more from the second one. That's 18 dice at 1 target. Now it's not 18 at once, so they will get their evade at each set of 3. But it's 18 dice, and statistically, you're probably looking at 1.5 hits out of 3. So with the cluster missiles with guidance, it's rounded and just benefit of the doubt, you're probably going to get 2 hits with one of the clusters, and then 1 to 2 hits with the second. So he's going to be less likely to get a huge number of hits. He's going to get a handful. These guys banking focus with guidance chips is fantastic. They have really good odds at hitting and can really drive some damage through. The damage potential for these guys on their initial Alpha Strike turn is fantastic if it goes well. The downside for these ships is, same thing with Blount, if Kraken goes down early and doesn't get his double clusters off, these guys aren't as effective. Their combo doesn't work quite as well. It's also rough when you're trying to get into range 1 to 2 to fire the clusters, and you have to weather a storm usually of range 3 shots before you get in. So there's a risk that Kraken or one of the other 2 Z95s is going to go down before they actually get to fire. That's why I favor the concussion spam, because it's a longer range Alpha Strike. It doesn't have the same maximum damage potential, but it's safer. I get to get my shots off early. The downside for both lists, however, is once you've expended your missiles, whether it's the concussions or the cluster missiles, you're done. Once they're gone, and then your Z95s go back into their standard pawn status, whether they're going to be blockers or if they're just trying to fly around and be annoying. Where this list shines a little bit more from the commander type slot with Kraken is that his ability is still useful once the missiles have been expended. Blount, on the other hand, once that combo has been expended, his pilot skill is almost useless for the rest of the game. So keep that in mind when you're looking at lists. So when we're looking at point spreads here, your Z95s are going to come into at the same point cost as they would if you were running concussions. You're looking at 16 points for the Bandit Squadron with cluster missiles guidance. Looking at 17 with the cluster missile and guidance for the Talus Squadron. So you're looking at 32 points for 2 of the Bandits, or 34 points if you're running 2 of the Talus. Now Kraken's going to come in at 23 points with the cluster missiles and guidance, and it's going to be 23 or 24 total, depending on if you run Veteran Instincts and Deadeye. So he comes in a little bit more expensive than Blount, but it depends on what the rest of your ships are going to be, if you're running support ships with them, or what the rest of your build's gonna look like. So for your total build, you could be looking at 32 plus 23, so 55 points. If I got the math right on that. I think I did. Or 57 points if you're running the Talus Squadrons, or a plus or minus 1 depending on if you run Veteran Instincts or Adaptability, something like that. So you're looking at having a little over 40 points for the remainder of your team. So keep that in mind when you're building lists. Now, are you a veteran player? Are you a new guy? Have you tried this list, or do you like something about it? Let me know below. Let's get a discussion started. As many of you guys may know, I also get paid to paint, so if you guys would like to have me paint some X-Wing minis for you, or some type of tabletop minis like Warhammer or maybe War Machine, Infinity, things like that, feel free to click quote request now. If you haven't already, please take a moment to like us on Facebook and subscribe on YouTube. Stay up to date with everything we're doing and help support the channel. Finally, I've also been trying to get my Patreon off the ground so I can get more video content out regularly. So if you'd like to support me in that way, and you'd like to get some cool swag in return, and maybe even win something in the future, please take a moment to check out my Patreon page now. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed, and as always, happy wargaming.